Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I just want to say that I am sorry I have taken so long to get out another part of Holly Madison's book. I honestly have just not had the motivation to do any sort of filming whatsoever. Honestly, right now, I'm forcing myself to do this because I know I need to do it and I can't keep y'all hanging any longer. But for some reason, my motivation for making videos has just been at an all-time low. So forgive me for that. We're going to get right back into Holly's book. Viewer discretion is advised due to the contents in the book. Let's pick up where we last left off. Chapter 12. She's my prisoner, you know, the Red Knight said at last. I don't know, Alice said doubtfully. I don't want to be anyone's prisoner. I want to be a queen. And that is from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, not looking through the glass, Through the Looking Glass. Chris was desperate to have me in Las Vegas for the premiere of his show Believe on Halloween night. After fulfilling my final scheduled obligation to Playboy in New York with Bridget and Kendra to promote a recently developed Playboy perfume, just don't call it Girls Next Door, I jetted off to Sin City to walk the black carpet with my new boyfriend. Seduced by this good-looking man who was seemingly frantic in his affections for me, I allowed myself to be lured in. After knowing each other for only a few months, he needed me by his side for the world premiere of his new show. I was the one who calmed his nerves, he said. I had become so used to taking a backseat to Hef and sharing the remaining spotlight with other women. I was beyond flattered that this successful man was so enthralled with me, and only me. Believe had utterly bombed during press previews. Critics were merciless in their dismembering of his performance. The Las Vegas Sun ruthlessly called Chris a charmless mook and a rudimentary stage performer. He's barely believable playing himself. It didn't stop there. The writer went on to say, the single most amazing thing about Believe is that it is still so boring. Ouch. No wonder he was nervous. I felt sorry for the guy. And like a magician does when wanting to guide the audience's attention away from a trick, he needed to provide a distraction, or in magician's terms, a misdirection, for the media the night of the show's opening. The night, unbeknownst to me, I was the misdirection. On the night of his premiere, Chris introduced the world to his splashy new romance, the flashy blonde who had seemingly stolen from right under Hugh Hefner's nose. We paraded down the press line, hand in hand, before pausing in front of photographers so Chris could plant a big, wet kiss on me. Wow, I thought, giddy with excitement of my new romance. He really wants to show me off. It wouldn't take long before the illusion started to dissolve. True to his word, Chris spent his days off toting me around Las Vegas. Like a normal young couple, we'd spend afternoons four-wheeling out in the desert or going to pool parties, and our evenings eating at the finest restaurants and catching some of the Strip's most acclaimed shows. The two of us didn't really have that much in common, but I was so thrilled to be able to go out and try new things that I didn't notice or care. We were quickly becoming the most buzzed about couple in Las Vegas. I have to admit, it was nice to be recognized as someone independent of Hef. Sure, people still thought of me as a Playboy bunny, but I had separated from Hef and was still not only relevant, but thriving. Things he told me that I wouldn't be without him. My name was topping search engine lists regularly, and I was being written about in gossip blogs. I had never received that kind of attention when I was with Hef. With all the excitement swirling around me, I found it easy to go along for the ride. Not long into our courtship, Chris brought me a piece of jewelry, a small diamond cross necklace. Conveniently, a photo of us at the jewelry store popped up on a few gossip sites, most of which speculated that we must be engagement ring shopping. With a 10-year Vegas residency on the horizon, Chris was in the market to purchase his first home and insisted on me coming along to all the showings. He wanted me to love what he insisted would be our future home. Okay. And we'd stroll through these sprawling Vegas estates. He'd ask my opinions on this feature or that fixture, seeming interested in what I had to say. On the days I would travel back to Los Angeles to work on my Playboy job that I somehow managed to hang on to, I'd come home to a huge bouquet of red roses, all ready, waiting for me at my Santa Monica condo. Chris didn't waste a single opportunity to continue impressing me. He would text me often throughout the day, wanting to know what I was up to, getting worked up when he couldn't get a hold of me. After a few trips back to the coast, Chris began insisting that one of his security guards accompany me. As our public profile continued to rise, Chris said it was in order to keep me safe. The guard would stay in a hotel near my condo and was to accompany me everywhere. It was awkward and embarrassing to have to explain to my friends why a security guard joined us for every meal. Doesn't that seem a little unnecessary? One friend suggested over our lunch. Maybe a bit possessive? No, I said, trying to hide my embarrassment. Chris worships the ground I walked on and genuinely worried about me, I thought. He's just protective, I explained. In my post-mansion life, Chris seemed to be exactly what I needed. It wasn't long before I reverted back into the Converse-wearing jeans, ponytail, and black nail polish kind of girl that I used to be in high school. No longer feeling the pressure to look and act like a human Barbie doll was a gigantic weight off my shoulders. In fact, Chris even encouraged me to go without makeup. Wow, somebody who likes me for who I really am, I thought. Despite having a complete break from my relationship with Hef, I still felt like I was awkwardly darting back and forth between two worlds. Not only was there my job at the Playboy studio, but there were still girls next door obligations to fill. I had been with Chris for only about 6 weeks or so when I received a call from the Girls Next Door producers asking me to come into the studio for audio commentary for the Season 5 DVD. Understandably, now that the season was wrapped and edited, the producers were eager to get this commentary in the can before the three of us girls scattered even farther in different directions. Despite placing an impenetrable candy coating on what was often a miserable existence, I was always very grateful for Girls Next Door and the opportunities it provided me. Who knows where I would have ended up if it hadn't been for the series. Perhaps still locked behind that giant gate, depressed as ever. Or worse. Committed to fulfilling my obligations to the show, I agreed to come in that week. For the audio commentary, producers set Bridget, Kendra, and me in chairs around a monitor. They'd play each episode and we'd talk about what was going on in that moment or provide some behind-the-scenes details. Despite having been away from the girls for only a few weeks, it felt like I hadn't seen them in years, and it was so much fun laughing over the show with them. My jovial mood, however, wouldn't last. During the final episode, producers had cut a video montage of Hef's and my most romantic seeming moments over the course of the last 5 seasons. With our breakup, not to mention the way he had treated me. Still so fresh in my mind, I couldn't begin to manufacture any sort of sentiment for the commentary. In fact, the entire montage made me sick to my stomach. Really? I groaned into the microphone at our producer. Do you have to do this? Holly, Hef is a romantic, he said calmly. He wants to hear from you. It's gross, I protested. Do you have to put all this in? We're not together anymore. Nobody wants to see this. He seemed disappointed that I wasn't making this easier, but I didn't care. The montage seemed wildly inappropriate. Plus, Chris was growing more and more sensitive about my affiliation with Playboy. About a month into our living together, he started getting really upset anytime an article would surface linking me to anything Playboy related. His rants frightened me, but since I had foolishly already moved in with Chris, I gave him chance after chance, hoping that this was a passing phase. In my head, I imagined Chris watching the episode and completely going off the deep end, which is exactly what would happen. After we wrapped commentary, Bridget, Kendra, and I gathered around outside the studio with the producers and the crew, chatting about the season, what we loved, what we hated, etc. You know Hef likes all the drama, Kendra began. We'd all had our complaints in the past, but this was the first time Kendra was so vocal in front of production. I guess since it was all over, she had nothing to lose. I remember one day, we were all watching a movie, and afterward, Hef followed me back into my room. He goes, I'm really disappointed that you didn't sit closer to me. And it was so weird. So I just said, well, that's like where Holly sits, and I don't want to, step on anyone's toes. Then the dude stomps his feet and was like, I like the drama. Kendra's story hit me like a punch in the gut. While I had long ago tired of Hef's double standards, ridiculous rules, and belittling comments, this was the first time I really realized what a manipulator he was. Suddenly, it all became clear to me. The biggest reason I never got along with most of the girls in the house was Hef. He encouraged the infighting all along. Despite his fake pleas for harmony, he was looking more and more pathetic in my eyes. I couldn't believe I had been manipulated for so long. I kept in touch with the show's producers regularly, since I openly blabbled to the press about my hopes to do a reality show of my own in Vegas. They called to find out what I had in mind. They also contacted me regularly to invite me to Kendra's bridal shower and to confirm me as a bridesmaid for her wedding. It was difficult for me to communicate with them, though, because Chris seemed to be getting more and more paranoid about any affiliation I had with Playboy or Girls Next Door, and tried to talk me out of even attending Kendra's wedding. While his behavior troubled me, I could almost sympathize with it in my own twisted way. After getting some space between me and the mansion, I was truly beginning to realize just how poorly I had been treated and what a grim situation that had been. And so, in a way, I saw Chris's behavior as him protecting me from Playboy. The way that she is able to excuse all those red flags is very concerning to me. During one of Chris's performances, I waited for him backstage and found myself alone for the first time in weeks. Usually, I watched his shows from the audience or waited backstage with other members of his entourage. But that evening, everyone else must have been occupied because I was the only one in the room. I decided to take the rare opportunity to call one of my favorite producers and catch up. The call didn't go quite how I had planned. Somewhere in the midst of our catching up, what was meant to be a friendly phone call turned into a berating session. I believe it stemmed from the fact that I didn't react the way they wanted to the Hef and Holly love montage during the audio commentary session. Well, I remember clearly, what I remember clearly is ending up in tears and trying to stick up for myself as he rattled off a list of complaints Hef had logged against me in a recent bad-mouthing session. I knew that when I made the choice to leave the mansion that I was leaving my spot on TV behind, but I certainly hadn't expected Hef to try and poison everyone I had worked with against me. My producer friend told me that all of the things I'd said during the commentary made everyone uncomfortable. Him, the crew, Bridget. Apparently, it had been okay for Kendra to rattle on and on about Hank throughout the commentary, despite having dated him behind Hef's back for the better part of a year. I guess because they had been planning a Kendra spinoff anyway, that was okay. True, they thought the spinoff was going to be about a wild single Kendra out on her own, but the concept of the show was easily adaptable to the idea of Kendra having a boyfriend once they found out about the secret months-long romance. I had thrown a huge wrench in their vision for Girls Next Door Season 6. However, so my behavior and honesty during the commentary was deemed wrong. It was incredibly hypocritical, but what else was there to expect from the same camp that thought we should all be faithful to Hef without him showing us the same respect? Seized by an anger that was bubbling up inside me, I phoned the mansion to confront Hef about what he was saying about me behind my back. For years, Hef had maintained friendships, however superficial, with most of his ex-girlfriends. I had expected to receive the same politically correct treatment and made sure that anything I said about Hef in the press was favorable and kind. For some reason, though, I seemed to be the first ex-girlfriend that he was going out of his way to poison. "Hello?" Hef answered, not sounding particularly happy to hear from me. "Hi," I said, and jumped in before he could stop me. "I've been told about all the things you've been saying about me, and it's not right. I did my best to be the best possible girlfriend for 7 years, and—" "Ha!" he shouted into the receiver, going on to accuse me of having had an agenda all along, and reprimand me for not showing up at mansion events post-breakup. "I wanted to give you your space," I near screamed into the phone. "I'm not going to show up and push whoever you're seeing out of the way. I was never that kind of girlfriend. I'm not Tina. I'm not going to play that game." I was fuming. For so long I tried to be, had been in fact, a model girlfriend. And here was Hef characterizing me as if I were no better than all the two-faced manipulators he dated before me. I was just trying to move on and live my life, but my 80-something ex wouldn't stop talking smack about me to anyone who would listen. So much for exiting with any grace. He could only respond by ranting about how much I had supposedly changed and what a different person I was. He was right. I had changed. And in my opinion, it was for the better. And for the first time in a long time, my opinion was the one that mattered to me. After that call, I quit my job at Studio West. While I adored my position and the people I worked with, staying felt awkward. I needed to leave Playboy totally behind me. Plus, I know I was no longer feeling challenged. Have had very cookie-cutter preferences when it came to Playboy shoots and layouts. So it wasn't long before I could do my job in my sleep. I felt like I wasn't learning anything anymore. Over the next year, I would routinely pick up the latest issue of Playboy to see the published pictorials. I was surprised to see the take on the Shandon twins and their pictorial, while the sunny, fresh-faced tennis-themed photos that I directed, the same shoot that was seen on The Girls Next Door, were still included. The rest of the pictorial had a distinctly different flavor. The girls had been styled as mansion mistresses, lying on top of each other on a floaty in the mansion pool, one of them donning Hef's signature captain hat, seductively straddling each other on Bridget's former bed, and climbing the grand staircase in nothing but cheap stripper store rhinestone jewelry. So much for The Girl Next Door, I thought. The title of our reality show was inspired by the way Hef described the ideal playmate back in the 50s when he launched the magazine. Most women pictured in other publications of the era wore heavy makeup and very stylized hair. Hef wanted something different. He wanted his playmates to look young and fresh-faced, not like someone's older sister, which was how he described the look of most models at the time. Chris seemed absolutely thrilled that I had quit my job. He'd been pestering me to leave and insisted I use his publicity and management teams. Since Playboy PR had long ago started giving me the cold shoulder, I accepted. Over the few months that I was with Chris, my heart would sink anytime I would see magazine articles featuring Bridget and Kendra together. It seemed as if Playboy PR was still working for them, and suddenly the two girls were pushed like never before. I was never contacted to be part of the photo spreads and interviews, though, and it hurt to be the only one left out. Despite the other two girls moving on to new men, I was the only one Hef was determined to punish. In the media, Hef would always say what a great girlfriend I had been, and that I was welcome back in his life at any time, which would always send Chris into a fury. But in reality, he wasn't being friendly towards me. Chris's explosive temper was becoming increasingly more alarming. I didn't want to go back to the mansion. Chris knew that. but it was as if he couldn't help his jealousy. For all his fame, fortune, and success, Chris, to me, seemed cripplingly insecure. This was starting to feel all too familiar. Before I met Chris, I had seen his television show and thought he was cute. Had I dug a little deeper and done some research on the guy, perhaps I would have been more hesitant to get into a relationship with him. According to reports in the press, earlier that year, Chris had threatened Las Vegas Review-Journal columnist Norm Clark in public, screaming, "Don't ever write another word about me, or you'll need an eye patch over your other eye." The confrontation was written about in the paper and online, but I wasn't aware of it until I had already started dating Chris. Many of his public rants, though, happened after I left him. Apparently, he singled Perez Hilton out in his audience one night and called him the world's biggest douchebag asshole, and magician Joe Monty filed a police report that alleged Chris flipped out and assaulted him. Monty produced an audio tape with a voice that is allegedly Chris's saying, "Get out of my place before I knock you out." I wasn't surprised by any of it after what I had experienced. In the beginning, any fame I had, Chris loved. That was what made our relationship such a publicity boon for him, after all. But as time went on, his jealousy seemed to get the best of him. I remember him barking at me to cover up my hair as he yanked my hoodie over my head. He then went on to complain that my bright blonde hair was attracting too much attention. It was true. Even in his resident casino, people would often spot me before recognizing him. After an amazing Elton John concert at Caesar's Palace, we went backstage to say hello to the friendly pop legend. His dressing room walls were covered with shells adorned with a massive bobblehead doll collection. "You have my bobblehead!" I squealed, pointing at two of my dolls nestled in among the immense collection. I have to admit, it was a total fangirl moment. I mean, who doesn't love Elton John? It was crazy, spotting my dolls in his dressing room. Chris snapped that he had his own bobblehead coming out, shooting me a death glance. Who gets jealous of their girlfriend like that, I thought. Again, those red flags that you're excusing, honey. Red flag, red flag, red flag. I thought we were supposed to be on the same team, but it was starting to feel more like we were in a one-sided who is more famous pissing contest. Before my last trip back to Los Angeles, I told Chris I planned to stay an extra day to take my car to the shop so that I could have some repairs done. He threw a fit, accused me of not caring about him, and told me I should put my car in his warehouse. Already, Chris had suggested I begin storing my valuables in his safe, including my diamond watch and the 2 pieces of jewelry he'd already lavished on me. To me, my car was a reflection of my independence. It didn't feel right locking it away, and honestly, Chris's apparent fascination with hoarding my valuables was beginning to make me feel uncomfortable. I canceled the car appointment and never mentioned it again. The last thing I wanted to do was put my car in his warehouse, and thankfully I never did. Still, despite any trepidation that may have crept into my mind, I still wanted to believe we had a shot at making it together. Girl, you just got out of that with Hef and just getting... She is too vulnerable. She should have given herself some time before jumping into another relationship. Because good Lord, girl. Anyways, though. It's easy to stand on the outside now and list the ways this relationship was clearly doomed, but I didn't have anything to compare it to. I had never been in a healthy, committed adult relationship before, so I didn't even know what was missing. With all my doubts, Chris seemed passionately in love with me, and that was what mattered to me at the time. The declaration of love from Chris flowed freely, and he talked in front of his friends about wanting to settle down with me. He took me back home with him to Long Island to show me off to everyone he knew. As the holidays approached, I was treated like I was already a member of his family. Since we were both December babies, I began thinking ahead to our birthdays. Chris had already scheduled our joint birthday celebration to be held at his favorite night spot, LAX. But I also wanted to keep a tradition that I developed over the last several years, a trip to Disneyland with a group of friends. Near my birthday, Chris and I planned a day trip to the Magic Kingdom and invited my usual guest list, which included a few girls from the mansion. As the day grew closer, my mansion friends suddenly became unavailable. "You won't believe it," said one of the girls who lived at the bunny house. "Hef heard you were going to Disneyland for your birthday and decided to take his new girlfriends the same day you're going." Seriously, I thought. Hef abandoned making the trek down to Anaheim years earlier. He suffered from chronic back pain, so having to walk more than a few steps at a time was incredibly uncomfortable for him. What are the chances that he all of a sudden decided to go to Disneyland on the very same day I would be there celebrating my birthday? It was a pathetic attempt to get in my face and perhaps try to remind me of his earlier accusation that the girls were my friends only as long as I was his girlfriend. "I don't know what to do," she grumbled. "He invited me to go with him, and I feel like I can't say no because I live in his house. This is really awkward." Several of the girls called to explain that they wouldn't be going with either of us. It was obvious Hef was trying to force them to pick sides, and they didn't want to get involved. If Hef wanted to go to Disneyland, that's fine, I told myself. He wouldn't deter my birthday celebration. Chris and I ended up spending the afternoon by ourselves. I asked our tour guide to keep me from running into Hef's group, which was also on a guided tour, which I'm sure soured Hef's plans of ruining my day and flaunting the guests he had ripped away from my celebration. Despite the fact that we avoided Hef, it still wasn't the most relaxed day at the park. Chris spent the whole day trying to orchestrate candid paparazzi shots without seeming obvious, which I found embarrassing. I never mind having my photo taken, but I hated his sneaking around. The way he tried to hide his oh-so-obvious agenda from our tour guide made him look, to me, like a complete idiot. This was the first time I felt embarrassed to be with him, and it wouldn't be the last. Back in Vegas, Chris and I filmed a TV segment together for a local New Year's Eve special. The bubbly reporter who interviewed us was very interested in the diamond ring that sparkled on my finger. It wasn't an engagement ring, but the large diamond birthday gift Chris bought me piqued the press's interest nonetheless. For Chris's birthday, I wanted to get him something special. But what do you get a man who has everything? Or at least could afford to buy himself anything he could ever want. I started reading interviews he had done online, hoping that it might offer me a clue or two. Chris had told a reporter that he was a huge fan of Salvador Dali. I'd never heard him mention art before, but why would he make something up like that? During one of my final trips to Los Angeles, I tracked down a rare Salvador Dali print at a Beverly Hills gallery. When I presented him the present, Chris tried to act impressed and thanked me vigorously, but didn't offer much more. His manager, who was also in the same room, seemed way more impressed than Chris. I thought. Maybe he doesn't really care about art after all. This was just one example of how the public Chris and the private Chris seemed like two very different people to me. For Christmas, I played it a bit safer. Chris had mentioned wanting to shoot a snowboarding episode of Mind Freak, so I commissioned Burton to create a custom snowboard and snowboarding gear. Believe it or not, he actually had the gall to ask me if Burton did that for me for free. So much for it being the thought that counts. All Chris seemed to care about was counting the pennies. In return, Chris showered me with an audacious diamond cross necklace, making the previous pendant he bought me pale in comparison. He also presented me with another necklace, this one with a large diamond-encrusted infinity symbol pendant. On the back, next to the clasp, was a little charm that read, in tiny diamonds, XOCA. Reading the huge smile on my face, Chris whispered that he had designed this especially for me, and that he'd never designed jewelry for anyone before, not even his wife. Chris had been married before to his hometown sweetheart, but they filed for divorce after she learned that he had been spotted with an A-list movie actress. Chris never missed an opportunity to remind me of his high-profile conquests. Wow, I exclaimed, truly breathless at the elaborate gifts. I don't know what to say. I love them. He picked me up in a huge hug. No one had ever lavished me with such elaborate romantic gestures before. Even though Hef had dropped a few pieces of jewelry on me, they were always pieces of mass-produced Playboy branded merchandise, made even less personal by the fact that identical pieces were given to his other girlfriends at the same time. To me, it was the care that mattered, not the carrots. Chris offered to fly my parents to Las Vegas to celebrate the holidays with us. I was impressed and flattered that he showed such an active interest in getting to know my family, something Hef had never done. I think Holly should have her own perfume, Chris told my parents one evening over dinner. The slogan could be, Holly Madison, bring out the bunny in you. My dad couldn't help but stifle a laugh. Can you even use that? He asked Chris. Isn't that kind of a Playboy thing? Chris was beside himself. He spent his entire career surrounded by yes people. So, he was completely at a loss for words and clearly uncomfortable that someone dared disagree with his idea. Ever the entertainer, Chris could charm the pants off anyone. In some cases, literally. But I was disappointed to learn that just an inch below the surface, he didn't appear to be the sharpest tool in the shed. Whenever he announced his next great idea, I usually fell silent. I didn't have the heart, for instance, to tell him that I wasn't interested in co-hosting a regularly scheduled love-sex pool party. Yes, that was the real name he actually came up with, at the Luxor with him. I felt sorry for him and didn't want to embarrass him. Chris asked me what my parents thought of him as we rode the elevator back up to his suite. He was clearly in need of some affirmation. They liked you, I said with a big smile. After all, they hadn't told me they didn't like him. My parents confided in me that they found him a bit controlling, but they were seeing things I wasn't necessarily ready to accept. On the other hand, they saw that I appeared truly happy. Plus, seeing me with a man closer to my own age had been a lot easier to swallow. He then asked me if I had told them I was in love with him. I told them I really like you, I offered honestly. I'd already moved in with him, adopted so much of his life, and gushed relentlessly about him to the press. I wasn't going to profess my undying love to my parents just 4 months after dating. Just after 4 months of dating. No matter how much of a whirlwind our time together had been, or how often we said it to one another, Chris pouted, crossing his arms, turning away from me, and grumbling, asking why he was even wasting his time on this relationship. Hey, I said defensively, I don't introduce my parents to many people. This was a really big deal for me. The warm Mexican sun beat down on my shoulders as Chris and I sat at our bedside table eating sushi and drinking Coke Lights with our friends Barbara and Ron. Enjoying a few days off from the show, Chris swept me away to Cabo San Lucas for a late January getaway. We're going to miss you guys, I bemoaned to Barbara beneath a perfect cloudless Cabo sky after a boating excursion. The couple's trip overlapped with ours for only a few days. They were longtime friends of Chris's and would soon become close friends of mine. The couple kept conversations lively and fun. They were the perfect antidote to the dark energy that I was starting to feel from Chris more and more lately. Let me give you my info, Barbara said. Text me anytime you're bored and want to go to lunch or something. Thanks, I said, pocketing the business card with Barbara's information. After we finished our leisurely lunch and said our goodbyes, Chris and I went back to our suite. Chris snapped at me as soon as the door had shut behind him. He demanded I give him the card and forbade me from texting her. Why? I asked, confused. She seemed really sweet, but perhaps there was something about her I didn't know. He put his hand out, motioning with his fingers for me to cough up the card. He gave me a lame excuse about Barbara being over the top. It was clear that he presumed this was an acceptable explanation, and he considered the conversation over. Begrudgingly, I handed the card over to Chris. Thankfully, I had already saved her number in my phone while we were still at lunch. After the holidays, I finally began recognizing Chris's behavior as unusually possessive. I'm just glad it dawned on her, because good Lord, girl. In addition to his unreasonable temper tantrums, hoarding my most valuable possessions, and encouraging me to quit my job, he was showing yet another troubling sign, isolating me from my friends. He didn't want me spending time with anyone else. He often found excuses to keep me away from my phone, and recently began demanding to see it when he saw me texting. Needless to say, I was scared of where this relationship was going. For the remainder of the trip, Cabo was hardly as relaxing. I soon learned that TMZ was reporting on our vacation. I never spotted the photographers. Judging by the photos, they appeared to be shooting us from boats off the coast or from neighboring hotel balconies. I later learned that Chris tipped off the paparazzi. He never turned down an opportunity for more press to distract from his show, which was now seeing more horrendous reviews. A review in the Los Angeles Times had recently said, if Criss Angel were blindfolded, straitjacketed, run over by a steamroller, locked in a steel box, and dumped from a helicopter into the Pacific Ocean, he might be easier to salvage from disaster than Criss Angel believe. Yikes. That night, Chris and I got into an awful fight. One of the first of many dramatic rows that would soon become a constant theme in the remaining weeks of our short-lived relationship. While the catalyst for the fights varied, the arguments themselves became somewhat formulaic. Here's how I would describe them. 1. Chris would become insanely jealous, usually a trigger associated with Playboy. 2. He'd accuse me of being a slut. 3. He'd say we should break up. 4. Chris would freak out if I didn't try to convince him otherwise or make attempts to save the relationship. I never did try to save the relationship during these tantrums. His outbursts would scare me. He'd calm down. 5. He'd calm down and tell me what a wonderful person I was and how lucky he was to be with a sweet girl like me. 6. He would then take me in his arms and tell me he loved me. I barely said anything during these rants, especially during the parts when I felt him getting hostile. His anger seemed irrational to me and was somewhat terrifying. By this time, it had become clear to me that I had traded in one controlling megalomaniac for another. If there was one thing you could say about me at the time, it was that I definitely had a type. There were differences, though. Hef was a master of manipulation and knew how to cripple a girl's self-esteem. Chris, on the other hand, just scared me. His anger filled a room, and while he never threw a punch at me, I was scared that something of that nature might be lurking around the corner. Once again, I was sleeping with the enemy. Only this time, instead of being trapped behind the mansion walls, I was Rapunzel looking high away in the penthouse of the Luxor Hotel. Chris had become so controlling that security shadowed my every move. I wasn't even allowed to go downstairs to grab a Starbucks in the lobby without a security guard or assistant being ordered to follow me. I started to wonder, was I really any better off than I had been at the mansion? After our trip to Cabo, Chris's performance schedule started to catch up with him physically. He no longer had the energy for any of the off-day excursions we used to do. And during his on days, I had no choice but to adopt his routine. Chris wanted me to be with him 24/7, and he balked when I asked to go on simple errands by myself. We slept in most of the day, ate Mexican food in bed, and headed straight backstage 2 hours before the curtains went up so Chris could begin his pre-show ritual. Get an hour-long massage, eat a sandwich, and sit for hair and makeup. And I thought mansion life got monotonous. Not only was I beyond bored, but my body ached from lack of exercise and activity. Fueled by his failing show, recently called a dog by Variety, Chris's treacherous outbursts became more and more frequent. I spent most days walking on eggshells, hoping to avoid yet another landmine. My nerves were so frayed that I often felt faint and nauseous, causing female members of his staff to joke that perhaps I was pregnant. After I was showering one day, Chris popped his head into the stall. With a false of air casualness, he said he saw that Bridget was hosting a Valentine's Day party in town that week and asked me if I was planning on going. I think he was itching for a fight. I felt my body weaken and the light start to darken as my eyes rolled toward the back of my head. Chris swooped me up before my knees could buckle and pulled me out of the shower and ran over to place me on the bed. He grabbed his terry cloth robe to lay over me and snatched a leftover chocolate cookie from Subway that was sitting on his dresser. Here, eat this, he said, tossing it to me from across the room. What happened? I don't know, I uttered breathlessly. I just felt really faint all of a sudden. I unwrapped the cookie and took a few bites as he stood over me and watched. I didn't plan on going to Bridget's party, I finally said. I didn't think you'd want to. I was scared to mention Bridget in front of Chris. He had become so controlling, always demanding to look at my phone and trying to keep me from seeing or speaking to any of my friends. He seemed to have a major problem with Kendra ever since she announced her plan to marry Hank at the mansion, which I always thought was a strange choice considering the Kendra I thought I knew would probably have preferred a beach wedding. Chris was wild with jealousy at the very thought that I might attend. Apparently, that was the right answer because his spirits immediately brightened. No, let's go to her party, Chris said, in what had become a rare moment of happiness. I continued lying in bed for a moment, enjoying my cookie, my boyfriend's good mood, and the security in knowing he had just rushed to take care of me. I was so relieved to have avoided another major blowout that I didn't even worry about what caused me to feel faint in the first place. In the first few months of 2009, my primary occupation was being Chris's moral and emotional support. When he flew to Los Angeles to tape a segment on Larry King Live, I traveled with him. Do you want to go on with Chris? One of his managers had asked me as Chris was being summoned onto set. Huh? I thought. I didn't come here to be on the show. I thought I'd just be sitting in the green room with the rest of the entourage that made the trip to Los Angeles. No, I'm okay, I said, waving my hands at Chris as if to say, go ahead without me. Chris pleaded with me to go with him, gesturing toward the sound guy who was already holding a second mic pack. I didn't feel like I had a choice in the matter. Okay, I said hesitantly, thanking God I wore makeup that day and wondering what I would talk about. I didn't realize it at the time, but apparently I was the sideshow attraction that was to be trotted out to distract viewers from the disastrous show reviews that Larry would certainly be bringing up. I had become used to being used for publicity at this point, but was still completely surprised by this particular ambush. Before I had been used for photo ops, planted articles, and local Las Vegas programs, but this was prime time, national television. It felt very uncomfortable. So, you've been on the show before, Larry said, giving me a pointed look. In 2005, I'd appeared on Larry King Live with Hef, Bridget, and Kendra to promote The Girls Next Door. It was obvious to me what he was thinking. To him, it seemed as if I was jumping from one rich boyfriend to the next with no purpose or pursuits of my own beyond being professional arm candy. And in a way, he was right. It hadn't been my intention, but the relationship with Chris proved so controlling and consuming that I hadn't been able to make any professional moves of my own. All of those dreams that I had been so enthusiastic about just a few months before had been shoved under the rug as my primary focus became being at Chris's side. Once again, a light bulb went off, and I resolved right then and there that I needed to make a change. It had become increasingly clear to me that I had jumped headfirst into this relationship way too soon. Having striven hard for fame the first 35 years of his life, Chris was an expert at putting on a charming facade and being able to win people over. After I had spent several months with him, the facade faded, and I started to see what was underneath, what the real Chris was like. I learned that our views on politics and most social issues were vastly different. He had a fifth grader sense of humor. His entourage had to muster up convincing fake laughs every time he repeated the same joke we'd heard a million times. I found him to be unintelligent, and he seemed virtually illiterate. He misused the words misnomer so much, even during interviews, that it made me cringe for him. It was disappointing to realize how incompatible we were, but I cared about him. So initially, I just felt sorry for him. But as time went on, I saw a mean, bullying, and deceptive side of him, and I started to get disgusted. I had ever been so enchanted by this man, and by my overwhelming desire to feel loved and needed, that I hadn't even taken the time to get to know him before committing myself to him. I realized I needed an exit strategy, and fast. Chris insisted that I be present for every one of his performances. In the beginning, I would watch the show from a seat in the audience, and Chris would manage to work my name into the narrative and introduce me at the end, along with his family. Initially, I thought it was sweet, but it soon became embarrassing. Eventually, he would suggest that I wait backstage with his bodyguard, which meant I would be there to greet Chris during his quick between-scene changes. He told me that having me there helped the shows go by faster for him. My mind was on my next step. Every time Chris went back on stage, I used those few minutes to pull out my BlackBerry and add to a list of what I needed to do. He was with me every other minute of the day, so this was my only chance. I quickly made the list. Find an apartment in Las Vegas. Contact Crazy Horse Pairs. Chris had successfully talked me out of accepting their offer to guest star. Get my valuables out of Chris's safe, etc. I wrote all of this in French, so Chris wouldn't be able to read the notes the next time he snatched my phone away from me. "Who are you texting?" the bodyguard sneered at me, throwing me a suspicious look. "No one," I said as I pocketed my phone. "I'm just writing down some ideas." I was done. I had gone to bed, finally ready to leave Chris. He had started another one of his one-sided arguments over nothing, and I had had enough. I didn't even try to engage him, and instead quietly sat through the rant until he calmed down, and I was finally able to go to sleep. The next morning, his fit clearly wasn't over. He stormed out of the master bathroom, tearing up a Valentine's Day card I had given him, featuring my pin-up portrait by Olivia on the front. Chris was screaming about having just noticed that the rendering included a pair of curled-up pink bunny ears on top of my head, striking a deep nerve in him. Chris finally said that he thought I should go back to my parents and that he would buy me a plane ticket. "Okay," I said, barely louder than a whisper. I was afraid to argue with him. I silently congratulated myself on this easy out he had just provided me. He stormed out of the room and yelled loudly to one of his assistants to book me a flight to Portland that afternoon. I crept out of bed and began gathering what I needed. Luckily, I still had a perpetually packed suitcase at the ready for my back and forth to LA trips that had come to an immediate halt a few months earlier. Chris asked me if I wanted to wear my jewelry, slyly eyeing the vintage Gucci watch I had purchased for myself, my small cross necklace, and ring he had given me. "Yes," I replied without thinking. It never occurred to me that he would actually expect the gifts back. After all, I had bought him expensive things too. When I finally pulled my things and myself together, I walked out into the living room of the suite. Chris's bodyguard was standing by to drive me to the airport. "Bye," I said, giving Chris a cold, distant hug. "Take care," he said just as coolly, before planting a kiss on my head and asking me to let him know that I got in safe. I don't know what's wrong with me, I cried through a stream of tears. It's like, I know he's an asshole, and I know he's not good for me, but I'm still so sad. I don't get it. I was home in Oregon, the same place where I had decided to pack up my little red Celica nearly a decade earlier. In some ways, it was as if nothing had changed, and I was back where I had started. I had no job, no man, and no prospects lined up. Luckily, my close friend Sarah Underwood lived in Portland and spent an afternoon listening to me as I poured my heart out. She was an absolute angel and held my hand through my frequent sobs. I was so grateful to have her there. She listened and offered me the best advice she could, But the real problem wasn't obvious to either of us at that point. Yes, I had just embarked on a high-profile romance that went wrong, quickly and dramatically. But that wasn't really where my emotional crash was coming from. I was suddenly having to deal with my transition from the twisted world of Playboy into the real world. It was the unavoidable emotional fallout that had been postponed by my whirlwind romance with Chris. What was I going to do now? I thought, feeling hopeless. After a week in Oregon, my dad drove me to the airport and I boarded a flight to Los Angeles. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I was determined to brave the storm. Despite the heavy burden of sadness I carried onto the plane with me, Chris's voice echoed in my mind, telling me I needed to go back to California. During a few of his tantrums, when he was mulling over a breakup out loud, he would always banish me to California, as if he owned Las Vegas. Where I go and what I do isn't your prerogative, I thought, as if I now had a chance to respond to one of his treacherous rants. I felt like Hef was trying to sabotage me in Los Angeles by bad-mouthing me and leaving me out of Girls Next Door related press. And now Chris was trying to banish me from Las Vegas. Sorry, boys. It's not going to be that easy, I thought, pulling my hoodie over my head. I felt the rumbling of the plane engines beneath my seat. You haven't seen the last of me. Chapter 13. For you, see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think that very few things, indeed, were really impossible. And that is from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. After my breakup with Chris, I returned to La La Land, absolutely lost. I knew that I wanted a successful career, but I didn't know how to go about achieving it. Since arriving back in Los Angeles, I was still reeling from the emotional fallout of my relationship with both Hef and Chris. For the first time in almost 8 years, I was entirely on my own, but this time I was carrying a whole load of emotional baggage behind me. What am I going to do next? God bless Mary O'Connor. After I spent all those years at the mansion, Mary became more than a friend to me. She became like family. When she and her partner, Captain Bob, invited me to stay in their spare bedroom while I got my feet on the ground, I couldn't have been more grateful. While she remained Hef's loyal and loving secretary for more than 40 years, Mary was also a compassionate woman who knew I needed her and knew damn well that Hef respected her too much to ever reprimand her for taking me in. Of course, I had my own apartment in Santa Monica, but I had become terrified of being by myself. I was desperately lonely and didn't feel at ease in my apartment. There was no security at my building, and the neighborhood in Santa Monica, where it was located, didn't feel very safe after dark. Every night I noticed a truck parked across the street from my living room window with a man sitting in the driver's seat for hours. I have no idea why he was there, but I found it creepy. What I needed most was a comfortable, safe atmosphere surrounded by people I loved and who wanted the best for me. It was the only way I could be sure that my next decision would be a smart one. I was scared of making another bad choice because I was anxious, lonely, or desperate. Despite Hef and the producers' insistent lobbying for my return to the mansion in the series, even though Crystal and the twins were already occupying our former spots, Mary encouraged me to make the best decision for me and to follow my heart. It's better for you to be on your own, she told me. Mary had a wonderfully maternal nature, and I often looked to her for guidance. You need to live your life. There's not much you can really do at the mansion. A few days later, I arrived. I contacted Chris's assistant about shipping out everything I'd left behind in my hasty departure. When the boxes arrived on Mary's doorstep, I burst into tears. I knew I didn't want to be with Chris, but I was still broken. It's a humbling experience, having a stack of cardboard boxes packed neatly with your belongings shipped back to you without even a single word. I felt like I had been thrown out with the trash. When news of Chris's and my breakup eventually leaked to TMZ, Chris began calling me and sending me nasty text messages accusing me of tipping off the press. He angrily accused me of telling them. When I asked him who he meant, he said Playboy, and went on to rant about how he knew this would happen, and angrily said that I had better be saying he broke up with me. There could have been no greater way of insulting Chris than if people assumed that I had been the one who wanted out of the relationship. I honestly didn't care what people thought. I was just happy to be a safe distance away from him. We had barely spoken since I left him in Las Vegas that morning, so needless to say, we never really discussed how we were going to handle our very public breakup with the press. I didn't know who told TMZ about our dissolution, since I had only informed my family and a few friends, but it seemed Chris was irate because he had his own ideas about how we would announce our split. Since we still shared the same publicist, we both got an email from him asking what kind of joint statement we would like to make about the breakup. Chris responded first, demanding that he tell them nothing. Our publicist quickly replied, "We have to tell the press something. If you don't, no one will ever want to cover you the next time you date a celebrity." Ouch, I thought. Hit him where it hurts. Eventually, we agreed to make a statement saying we broke up amicably due to scheduling differences, regardless of the fact that I had nothing to schedule. I don't know if anyone bought the excuse, but I didn't really care. The media and the public had become so used to seeing Chris run through starlets for publicity that I doubt many people ever believed our relationship was genuine. I was possibly the only one who had. Now that my relationship with Chris was behind me, I could finally focus on my future. Though I was tempted to waste away in Mary's spare room, I knew I had to take action. At the insistence of Chris, I had turned down most of the opportunities that had come my way shortly after I left the mansion, most of which Chris's jealousy didn't allow for. Besides, Mary, no one associated with Playboy or Girls Next Door, would have anything to do with me unless I abandoned my own dignity and returned to the mansion, which was the last thing I wanted to do. No, I thought, I'm starting from scratch, and I'm doing it on my own. I made a list of the things I still hope to accomplish in my life and career. Being able to see my goals spelled out in front of me was an important part of the process. For my career, my list was pretty specific. 1. Develop a reality series that showcases the real Holly apart from Girls Next Door, Playboy, and Hef. 2. Star in a Las Vegas show. And 3. Appear on Dancing with the Stars. The list went on, but those were my main goals. Prior to leaving the mansion, I had interviewed for Dancing with the Stars and even met with the producers. I had fallen in love with the series when its second season aired in 2006. The contestants looked like they were having so much fun, and I couldn't take my eyes off contestant Stacy Keibler's flashy costumes. Although I wasn't a dancer, I was dying to be on the show. It looked like the contestants were having the time of their lives. But despite how popular the Girls Next Door was at the time, rumor had it that one of the show's producers didn't think middle America could relate to a young woman who lived with an old man like Hugh Hefner. Determined to one day appear on the series, I tried revisiting the idea 2 months earlier during a meeting with Chris's managers. This was during the period he insisted on shaping my career. "So I called Dancing with the Stars," Chris's manager began, "since you told me you were interested in it, but they've already cast their upcoming season." Chris remarked snidely that Dancing with the Stars was a show for has-beens, and the only person to have ever done it right was Marie Osmond, because she did it right before she opened her show in Vegas. None of my career ideas were up to Chris's standard, so this one, like many others, was shot down. After making my list, I decided that tomorrow would be the beginning of a fresh start. I knew what I hoped to achieve. Now, I charged myself with the task of going out there and making it happen. Deep down, I knew that I would be okay. For the first time in weeks, I felt optimistic about my future. I knew I needed to gather my strength, so I decided to let myself sleep in before somehow starting a new life the next day. When I crawled out of bed later the next morning, I noticed I had 3 missed calls and voicemails from the same number on my BlackBerry. Each was from a producer at Dancing with the Stars, urgently looking to get a hold of me. Holy shit, I thought. Was I dreaming this? I listened to the voicemails again, just to make sure I hadn't completely taken a dive off the deep end. The producer had hoped she had the right number, since she was calling the phone number they had listed on my file from the first time I interviewed. It was such an uncanny coincidence that I had to believe that someone above was answering my prayers. Since they had just announced the Season 8 roster a few weeks earlier, and the series was actually premiering the following week, I figured that casting directors must be beginning their search for the following season's hopefuls. Hi, this is Holly Madison returning your call, I said nervously into my cell phone, to whichever bigwig I had just happened to call. In all the excitement, I didn't even remember the name of the person who had called me. The producer confided, after swearing me to confidentiality, that singer-songwriter Jewel had seriously injured herself during rehearsals, and they were desperately in need of a quick replacement. Would you be willing to do it? She asked expectantly. You would only have 4 days to learn your routine, while every other contestant has already had a month's worth of rehearsals. Are you kidding? Of course! I gleefully shouted into the phone. I couldn't believe my luck. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm beyond grateful for this opportunity. I continued to stammer, positively beside myself. I can't believe it. She seemed totally relieved and let out a big laugh. It was meant to be. After giving her all my current contact information, I called my publicist, telling him the good news and swearing him to secrecy. My addition to the Dancing with the Stars cast was supposed to be kept quiet until they announced it live on the premiere episode. The next few days were an absolute Cinderella story. After signing the contract with Dancing, I was immediately whisked off to meet my new partner, Dimitri Chaplin, a new Dancing with the Stars talent who graduated from TV's other juggernaut dance series, So You Think You Can Dance? Production provided me with my first set of dance shoes for our rehearsal. 8 hours of practice later, my feet had erupted into terrible blisters, but I didn't care. I lined the shoes with moleskin before returning the next morning. Not even the pain in my feet could dampen my spirits as I skipped my way back to the studio, eager to continue our routine. Our first number was a cha-cha to Lady Gaga's anthem, Just Dance. I was overcome with excitement. Could they have chosen a more perfect song for this particular time of my life? After the second day of rehearsals, I was swept away to the office of Emmy Award-winning costume designer Randall Christensen on the CBS lot to begin fittings for my first outfit. Side note, while the series airs on ABC, it's actually shot on the CBS lot in West Hollywood. Reminiscent of Hollywood's golden age, the costumes for each Dancing with the Stars episodes are crafted in-house each week. In what felt like no time, Christensen whipped up a short, vibrant, orange dress drenched in beaded fringe and Swarovski crystals. It was absolutely to die for. Even though I was the new girl on the set, the producers, cast, and crew couldn't have been more welcoming. Everyone was an absolute delight to work with, and seemingly grateful that I had agreed to step in at the very last minute. Little did they know that this was the break I had been praying for, an opportunity when I truly needed it most. Was I nervous to perform my newly learned dance in front of a live studio audience and 22 million viewers watching live at home? Duh! But not too nervous to forget to have fun and enjoy my moment in the spotlight without any ominous boyfriend hovering over me. As long as I remembered the routine, I was going to be okay. My priority was to have a good time, work hard, and of course, enjoy wearing the fabulous sparkly costumes. Over the course of my tenure on the show, my scores were mediocre, My dancing wasn't great, and the 8-hour rehearsals 5 days a week were brutal. And I was having the time of my life. After practice, I'd make the drive back to Mary and Captain Bob's home in the valley and collapse on my bed. For the next month, my life would be eat, sleep, dance, repeat. After my debut, Chris eventually reached out to me to offer his congratulations. With distance and a bit of time between us, it appeared we could be civil. Some of his messages were very flirty or risque, but I didn't bite. I had heard through the grapevine that he had already moved on and was living with his current girlfriend. Plus, I knew Chris well enough to be certain that any sort of affirmation I was getting from him was most likely motivated by the new positive publicity I was receiving for being a part of the Dancing with the Stars cast. For my part, I didn't resent him for how he had treated me, even though I could have. Instead of wallowing in the past, I chose to happily close that chapter of my life and be satisfied that we seemed to be on good terms. So you say, I'm Holly. I was one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends at the Playboy Mansion. Directed Freddie, a Dancing with the Stars field producer, from behind the camera. I stalled. I don't really want to say that. Can I say something else? That's what they had here for you to say, Freddie said, looking down at his notes. I mean, that's how people know you. He didn't mean it as a jab. There's no way he could fully appreciate how negative the association was to me, or that I was so eager to separate myself from Hef. Can I say, I'm Holly. I starred on the television show The Girls Next Door. I meekly and politely suggested, praying he would take the bait. I was so grateful for the opportunity, and despite the contract and grueling blisters, I was still slightly terrified the rug could be pulled out from under me, so I didn't want to go against even their smallest wish. But I just couldn't be labeled as Hef's ex. Not this time. Silence. Obviously, this wasn't my first foray into reality television, and I knew the executive producers had given Freddie the sound bites they wanted to hear. It was his job to make sure we stuck to the script. He thought about it a minute longer. Why don't you say, hi, I'm Holly. I was one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends at the Playboy Mansion on the show The Girls Next Door, Freddie suggested, hoping this would satisfy my concerns. I'm not going to say the girlfriend part, I said, through a sheepish smile. I knew I was pushing the envelope. I didn't want to be difficult, but I had to finally stand up for my own dignity and self-respect. I'm sorry, I'm just tired of being branded that way. I mean, no one else would introduce themselves as somebody's ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, you know? Okay, if you absolutely don't want to say it, Freddie conceded with a shrug. In the end, I introduced myself as, I'm Holly Madison. I've been on the cover of Playboy 4 times, and I starred in a reality series called The Girls Next Door. Producers got their Playboy reference, and I was able to stand Hef free for the first time. One battle down, countless more to go. Being branded as Hef's ex was a label that would continue to haunt me for years. And it probably still is, if we're being honest. You know what I'm saying? But one, I would always fight against. I refused to let that be the most defining thing in my life. Besides the one-time introduction and a legitimately funny Playboy-related joke where fellow contestant Belinda Carlisle said, I'm the former Miss August. Then contestant Denise Richards said, I was Miss December. And then they cut to me saying, I've been Miss February, March, September, and November. I was able to steer clear of any Hef or Playboy references throughout my run on the series. When an entertainment news program came to film one of my rehearsals, the interviewer asked, what do you have to say to Hef, wishing you well on Dancing with the Stars? He must have read the perplexed look on my face, because I hadn't heard anything from Hef since landing on the show. We taped a message from him, and we want to hear what you have to say in return, he explained through forced excitement. What's going on? I asked my manager disappointingly, looking over my shoulder at him for help. "Hey guys, this is really inappropriate." He immediately jumped in. He then suggested the interviewer wrap up the segment. Of course, it would have been great for Hef to wish me well, but I wasn't really buying it. If he wanted to say good luck, he could have easily gotten a hold of me. Instead, he used the opportunity to make a public statement and capitalize on the chance to look like the perfect gentleman. The whole thing felt insincere to me. A few months earlier, after Kendra announced her engagement, Hef publicly stated that she'd be getting married at the mansion, and he'd be the one walking her down the aisle, before Kendra even fully agreed to it. Kendra later insisted that her brother gave her away. It was creepy enough that she had to get married at her ex-boyfriend's house. Did I really expect any different from Hef? He had been a public icon for more than half a century, but still, after all this time, he felt the need to milk every possible publicity opportunity bone dry. Wounded by the mass exodus of his beloved girlfriends, Hef was struggling to avoid looking like he wasn't in absolute control of the situation. It wasn't enough that he had already restocked the pantry with 3 younger, blonder girls. He needed to stay publicly involved in Kendra's and my new ventures, as if he were still orchestrating our lives. Who knows? Maybe he meant well, but his behavior was suffocating, and it motivated me to run even farther and farther away from my past. I realized that dancing could end any week for me, so I couldn't allow myself to become complacent. As much as I wanted to completely submerge myself in the show and enjoy every moment, I needed to quickly identify my next opportunity and strike while the iron was still hot. I suggested to my manager that we reach out to the Crazy Horse Paris again to see if they were interested in reopening our discussions. "I have something else that I think you might be a good fit for," he countered. "There's a new show opening at Planet Hollywood called Peep Show, and they're looking to replace the lead every 3 months." From what I had read about Peep Show in Robin Leach's column in the Las Vegas Sun, I knew it was a Broadway-influenced revue with a sexy fairy tale theme and a sultry Bo Peep as the lead character, hence the show's name. I'd seen some early marketing for the show around Las Vegas and didn't find the ads particularly appealing. In the posters, a shadowy, mysterious-looking Bo Peep in a sinister-looking Red Riding Hood lurked on a black background. The Bo Peep wearing a stock, trashy lingerie corset. Of course, when I finally saw the show, I realized how little those posters captured its essence and style. While it didn't sound very enticing, especially considering that I was looking for something more long-term, I agreed to take a look once I could get back to Vegas. In the end, I lasted about a month on Dancing with the Stars and had simultaneously gotten myself into the best shape of my life. With all that dancing, I could eat anything I wanted. McDonald's French fries with barbecue sauce, anyone? And I still had a 6-pack. After my elimination, I embarked on a whirlwind press tour, appearing on Jimmy Kimmel Live, where Jimmy introduced me as one of Hef's girlfriends. Oh boy. Before being flown to New York for a bunch of interviews and appearances, I knew that I'd be returning to Dancing with the Stars in another short month to perform on the finale along with the other eliminated contestants, so I was determined to have secured my next gig before then. If I could announce my future plans on the finale in front of 22 million viewers, it would be perfect. With a few weeks to collect my thoughts, I made a special trip to Las Vegas to catch a performance of Peep Show. During my short stint there, I fell in love with the newly renovated Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino. The Peep Show Theater held an impressive 1,500 patrons. Most burlesque shows I had seen capped at around 300. Wow, I thought, they're really taking this show seriously. The theater itself was remodeled specifically for Peep Show, which told me that both the producers and the hotel intended for the show to stick around for a while. Large, exquisite props that looked like lace corsets beautifully covered the lobby's ceiling as mirrored walls glistened and glimmered around us like disco balls lined with plush white Hollywood Regency sets. Around the theater, the peeping keyhole motif was everywhere, and 3 large runways jetted out from the stage into the audience. As the lights dimmed and the show began, larger-than-life LED screens glowed behind the stage, showcasing a magnificent black and white video of its current star, Kelly Monaco, a fellow Dancing with the Stars alum, former playmate, and soap actress. At the time, the show had 2 headliners. The other was former Spice Girl Mel B, who played the role of Peep Diva. Kelly finally entered the stage wrapped in white acrobat's silk, hanging 30 feet from the ground. The routines, dance numbers, and acrobatics were jaw-dropping. Even though the best routines didn't even feature Bo Peep, it didn't matter. I was seriously impressed. It felt somehow as if the part of Bo Peep had been written specifically for me. The character begins as a modern-day woman who can't find love. After drifting off to sleep one night, she finds herself in dreamland, being led through a series of vignettes, each teaching her how to be confident and sexy. In the end, she finds her man only after finding herself. As the performers took their final bows at the show's end, I leaned over and shouted in my manager's ear over the deafening applause, "I want in!" Chapter 14. "What do you know about this business?" the king said to Alice. "Nothing," said Alice. "Nothing whatever?" persisted the king. "Nothing whatever," said Alice, and that is from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. It turned out that Peep Show wasn't just any small potatoes Vegas review. This was serious business, and the creator and mastermind behind the production was none other than Tony Award-winning choreographer Jerry Mitchell. I knew that this could be just the opportunity I'd been hoping for. I officially threw my hat in the ring the next day. Auditions and interviews for the show were extensive and brought me back to Las Vegas regularly over the next few weeks. "Do you guys mind waiting in the other room?" I asked my manager and my friends Angel and Allison. I was preparing for my final Peep Show audition in front of the show's director. "Oh yeah, no problem," Allison said, motioning everybody into the next room. The role required me to wear the skimpiest of costumes, which I wore as part of the audition process, and I was still a little self-conscious, despite my new Dancing with the Stars physique, and wanted some privacy. Contrary to popular belief, just because I had posed nude for a magazine doesn't mean I am the most confident, exhibitionistic person in the world. In fact, I was nervous that I wouldn't look good enough to be cast. What if I had cellulite? What if my body looked too fake? 7 years of being reminded that I never looked quite good enough was a hard burden to shake. Plus, I felt sort of dumb performing the choreography while weaving around all the furniture in the cramped hotel suite. I know it seems counterintuitive that I was that nervous for the audition, since I was so eager to perform nightly for a large live audience. But there was something comforting about knowing that I'd be on a large stage far removed from the crowd, with the appropriate distance between us and, of course, flattering lighting. "What if I have tattoos?" I asked Jerry nervously, "and bruises. I bruise really easily. Should I be wearing body makeup?" "Not unless you want to," he shrugged, with his signature warm smile. "Tattoos and things don't really matter to me. It's more important that everyone in the cast is different, unique, and comfortable in their own skin." Well, that should have sounded reassuring. I was far from comfortable in my own skin. I spent most of my adult life at the mansion being required to clone the other women around me, so the idea of being unique was alien to me. I had a hard time believing that unique was really something anyone would want to see. I couldn't even wrap my head around what was unique about me. More and more, I worried I wasn't right for the part. After performing the choreography, I had learned my audition was done. Though the producers would assure my manager that I had done great in the audition. I had no idea if they really thought that or if they were just giving him a polite answer. I wasn't particularly confident about my chances. As the month went by, more names were being floated into consideration, and it was rumored that Lindsay Lohan was the front runner. I'm screwed, I thought, my confidence quickly deflating. They'll definitely pick her. Imagine the publicity they could get. One of my peep show callbacks happened to land on Hef's birthday weekend, which he traditionally celebrated at the Palms in Las Vegas. Mary let me know that Bridget, Kendra, and I had been invited to attend. Naturally, part of me wanted to stay as far away from the man and his party as possible. But at the same time, you have to understand that I'd been out of the mansion for only about 6 months at this point, and while I was increasingly coming to terms with the hell Hef had put me through, there was still a part of me that wanted to be able to walk away on good terms with a clean slate like all his other girlfriends. I didn't want anything from Hef, except perhaps for him to stop bad-mouthing me. Plus, I wanted to see Bridget and Kendra. Bridget was planning on singing Happy Birthday at Moonlight Nightclub for the second half of the festivities that night, and I wanted to support her. Be that as it may, I agreed to attend the soiree only if I could have my own booth. It was proposed that I join Hef in his booth, but I needed to stand my ground as an individual. I was sick of the attempts to recruit me back into the harem. I had heard through the grapevine that Crystal Harris had become Hef's new main girlfriend. I was thrilled that he had fallen in love again. I hoped her presence on his arm and the fact that they had just started filming Girls Next Door Season 6 would take some of the pressure off me. The friends of Hef's had previously been so supportive of me had recently become less kind, believing that I had somehow left him in the lurch. Now maybe things would be different. For my part, I was only interested in moving forward with positivity despite anything that had happened in the past. The wind was whipping wildly across the Palms pool. Since it was considered a pool party, I chose to wear a black skull-printed bikini and denim skirt. But I may have been better served with a windbreaker. It was awesome seeing the other girls again. Kendra complimented me on my new abs, and it was great to meet Hank and to see Kendra's new boo, Nick Carpenter. When Hef finally arrived at the party, new girlfriends in tow, Bridget, Kendra, and I went to say hello and wish him a happy birthday. I greeted Carissa and Christina, who were warm and friendly, and then said hello to Hef, who looked more pale than usual, but otherwise seemed to be in a relatively good mood. Next, I introduced myself to his new main girlfriend, who is occupying the seat to his left. "Hi, I'm Holly," I said with a big smile, sticking out my hand. Remembering how people used to treat me, I made a conscious effort to go out of my way to be kind. "Hi," she said in a forced sing-song voice, offering me a limp, weak handshake. Was that a sneer on her face, or is the midday sun causing her to squint, I wondered. Immediately, my gut told me that something was up with this girl, but I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. She was young and new to all the commotion surrounding Hef. I chose to dismiss her shitty first impression as poor social skills, and not the snobbishness that it felt like. Hef's photographer, Elaine, lined us all up for a photo, as the former girlfriends, Bridget, Kendra, and I, lined up next to the new girls, but were directed by Hef and the photographers to stand next to Hef instead. I felt bad that the new girlfriends were being shoved aside for the famous ex-girlfriends. I'd been shoved aside so many times myself in these situations and remembered how awful it felt. After the photos were snapped, Hef and the Shannon twins said goodbye as they were whisked away for press interviews. Crystal couldn't even be bothered to look in our direction. "You got it!" my manager gleefully shouted. "What?" I squealed into my cell phone, hardly able to believe what I was hearing. Just a few days before my return for the Dancing with the Stars season finale, I received word that I had landed the part of Bo Peep for a 3-month stint in Las Vegas. I was absolutely over the moon and determined to work hard, promote my butt off, and with luck, find a way to become a more permanent part of the production. The turnaround for production was quick and required me to get out to Las Vegas immediately following the Dancing with the Stars finale. As I busied myself with packing the few things I had in my Santa Monica condo, I got a call from the Shannon twins. They wanted to see if I would meet them for lunch in Beverly Hills. Sure, the twins had a crazy reputation, but I liked them. They had always been nice to me, and I assumed they wanted some advice on navigating the mansion and Hef. Like I said earlier, you don't get a mansion operations manual when you move in, so I was happy to help them any way I could. "We want you to come back," Christina blurted out not 5 minutes after we sat down at Il Paseo. I'm not from Los Angeles, never been there, never been to Beverly Hills. I don't know how to say this damn restaurant name, so feel free to correct me in the comments. "Yeah, come back," Carissa whined, their words almost overlapping. These two literally finished each other's sentences. "I can't come back. I've already made a decision to move on," I said sympathetically, picking up a piece of bread out of the basket. "Why? What's wrong?" I knew something must be askew for the twins to be asking my help. The girls went on to say that they thought Crystal was mean, scowls appearing on their faces. Apparently, Hef's newest girlfriend wasn't too good at making friends. They even went on to say that she was mean to Hef, though they didn't give specific examples. "Really?" I asked. In the past, I've witnessed some of Hef's more vocal girlfriends fight back or disobey, but never were they outwardly mean to him. Not to his face, anyway. I wasn't sure what the twins meant when they said she was mean. It was just clear that they didn't like living with her. One of the twins chimed in that Hef was really sick and not doing well before the other one took over, saying that he had fallen down in his bathroom the other day and wet himself. Christina reiterated that Crystal wasn't good for him, as if to imply his declining health was somehow Crystal's doing. "Oh, that's awful," I said solemnly, bouncing my head back and forth from Tweedledee to Tweedledum, trying to keep up with the story. Friends inside the mansion had confided to me that Hef had become extremely frail and downtrodden. When the economy had crashed and burned in late 2008, I knew that Playboy must have taken a pretty severe hit. Hef already had financial pressures gnawing at him prior to Wall Street crashing, so this couldn't have helped matters. Christina tried to explain things to me, saying that Crystal felt really threatened by me, and that any time she heard I had spoken to Mary, she freaked out because she thought I was going to come back. Carissa cut in and said that when Hef had heard I was going to be at his birthday party, he took extra time in front of the mirror getting ready, and that this had made Crystal jealous. "Well, she doesn't have to worry," I said calmly and coolly. "I'm definitely not coming back. In fact, I'm really trying my best to give Hef space," and one of the blonde beauties cut me off, telling me that Crystal took the panel off my old desk with the birds and the initials. Well, that was fast, I thought. Years ago, when I had convinced Hef to let me have a desk installed in the vanity, I had a professional woodworker from the mansion staff fashion a beautiful hand-carved panel for the desk drawer etched with the likeness of my favorite mansion birds. In the center of the panel was a heart with my initials, HM. Considering Hef's monogram, HMH, littered everything at the mansion. Notepads, matchbooks, you name it. I figured he could always add an H at the end to make it his own initials on the off chance I didn't last. I have to admit, I felt a little slighted. Pictures of Tina, Brandy, and Kimberly littered Hef's room for years after I had moved in, and Crystal was already throwing fits about any sign of me just a few months into dating Hef. "It's a little early in the relationship for her to be that picky," I said, with a small smile. I didn't want to give the twins any false hope that I was going to come back, and I wasn't there to badmouth Crystal, so I stopped talking and wrapped up the conversation. After lunch, I hugged the twins goodbye and wished them luck and let them know they could call me anytime. They didn't know what to make of what Carissa and Christina. I didn't know what to make of what Carissa and Christina had told me. I didn't feel like they were trying to sensationalize things. They just had their own way of communicating. That didn't always make sense to me, and no filter when it came to revealing others' personal details. While living at the mansion, the girls even told the son that Hef was losing his hearing due to his use of Viagra. I have to say, I was a little curious about this Crystal character, though I kept far away from Hef and Crystal, in part to avoid replicating how Tina had made me feel after her departure. It still seemed like Crystal had major jealousy issues. A few weeks earlier, I had run into a Los Angeles magazine editor I knew socially who told me a story about Hef begging him to retract a statement he had made about my being welcome back in his life anytime. The editor threw up his hands and said he told Hef he couldn't retract it, and that he had him on tape saying it, and that he heard his new girlfriend threw a fit about it when it came out. When it came to being dramatic, it appeared Hef had met his match. As part of my contract with Peep Show, I was given a high roller suite at Planet Hollywood. Not only did I have a steady job, I also had a reason to return to Las Vegas, a place that felt more like home in a few short months than LA had felt in almost 10 years. With my Prius brimming with all of my belongings, I said my tearful goodbyes to Mary and Captain Bob and headed straight for the desert. Not long after arriving in town, I was finally able to meet up with Chris's bodyguard at the Luxor in order to grab my valuables that had been sitting in his penthouse safe for the last 2.5 months. Chris had told me that mailing them wasn't the best idea. I can't wait to finally get my stuff back, I sighed to Angel, who had become my new best friend as we drove down Las Vegas Boulevard. It's like severing the last tie of that relationship. It feels good to finally move on. Amen, exclaimed Angel as we drove into the Luxor's North Valet. The bodyguard, whose expensive SUV had been idling as if he was on his way somewhere, jumped out of his car after spotting me. You drive a Prius? He sneered. Yeah, I replied, caught off guard by his making fun of me. He'd always been nice to me before, but all of a sudden condescending and rude. He let out a snarky laugh as he gave my car the once-over. Thanks for bringing this stuff down, I said, eager to get out of what was starting to feel like a really awkward situation. Yeah, no problem, he said shortly, handing me a bulging manila envelope. Without as much as a goodbye, he got back to his truck and took off. I jumped back into my car, ripped open the envelope, anxious to see my things. What's wrong? Angel asked, seeing the upset look on my face. Some of my jewelry was missing. Specifically the items he had given me, the diamond-encrusted infinity necklace and the large cross. Did he seriously take back those gifts, I thought? It's not like I intended to wear jewelry given to me by an ex-boyfriend, but I didn't think he'd actually take them back either. It was as if he was telling me I was never worth it to begin with. It was also a pretty cheap move, after all. It wasn't like I was asking for the dolly back, although perhaps I should have. It wasn't about the jewelry, although I did wear the small necklace and ring he had given me to a few press events, knowing I'd be photographed and what a big fuck you that would come across as. It was about him not having the decency to say something to me about it. Once again, I felt like I had been thrown out with the trash. I decided to send him a text and give him the benefit of the doubt. Hey, the jewelry you gave me was missing from the packet I just picked up. I typed into my BlackBerry. I thought maybe he would have a few words explaining why he wanted to keep those things, and that would have made it all okay. But I never got a response. I looked at my new life in Las Vegas as an opportunity to reinvent myself. It had been an uphill battle, but I was finally where I wanted to be as a single successful career woman making something of my life. To celebrate, I traded in my leased Prius and bought a convertible Porsche with some of the money I had earned on Dancing with the Stars. I wasted no time having it painted a custom sparkly pink. It didn't take long before I felt completely at home in my Planet Hollywood suite. I was even given an adjacent suite for my friend, playmate Laura Croft, Laura was eager to make the move to Vegas, and I thought she would be a great character for the new reality series that I was hoping to develop. She was very pretty and had a wild personality that I hoped would translate on television. Living at Planet Hollywood was absolutely surreal. It felt like all the perks of the mansion had been rolled up into one luxurious package and dropped squarely at my feet. Besides the gorgeous suite and 24-hour butler service, my Peep Show contract covered all the room service and restaurant food I could eat, including the casino Starbucks, and limitless salon and spa services. The best part was, I never felt lonely. At any given moment, there was a 24-hour party right outside my door. As the youngest headliner on the strip, I took the city by storm. I knew that promoting myself was the key to having a successful run with Peep Show. So I attended every opening, every red carpet event, and every pool party, and landed myself on the cover of the Vegas entertainment magazines before my debut. Despite the crumbling economy, it was a magical time in Las Vegas. Somehow, it seemed that the city was extra determined to carry on just as fabulously as it had before. When I wasn't busy running around taking in all Sin City had to offer, I was buried in Peep Show rehearsals. I couldn't have been more excited at the opportunity, but I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to pull it off. Would people really pay to see me? I had only a few weeks of rehearsal and managed to pick up the choreography pretty quickly, thanks in large part to my time on Dancing with the Stars. But all those insecurities were still running rampant. Sure, I had done pictorials for Playboy, but those photos were rigidly posed, heavily lit, and accessorized to perfectly complement my body. For Peep Show, I would be performing on stage for 90 minutes in front of a live audience wearing the tiniest costumes. My body had taken such a beating during the exhaustive rehearsals, and I had bruises everywhere, not to mention scars that remained of my Playboy bunny tattoo. My boobs are going to look disgusting, I told Nick, the choreographer. I imagined them bouncing all over the place during the highly acrobatic performance. And it didn't necessarily strike me as sexy. He assured me that it was all in my head. This was my big break. If I could manage to fill seats and earn favorable reviews over those 3 months, maybe they would decide to let me stay. I busted my ass day and night to make sure I gave this show everything. The tremendously talented cast was warm and welcoming. I'm not sure they thought a reality TV star could add anything to their show, but they saw how hard I was working, and that I took the production very seriously. It wasn't long before I joined their inner circle. Most of the cast were Broadway singers and dancers brought in from New York. Jerry wanted the best of everything, so all these new transplants bonded quickly, and like me, they were taking the city by storm. After rehearsals, the cast would hang out at Strip House, the restaurant next to our theater, and hit up clubs every couple of nights. I grew especially close to the lead singer, Josh Strickland, who became like a brother to me almost instantly. I don't think there was ever a group of people that had as much fun as we did. It was an amazing time to be part of that show. As I prepped for my debut, I'd watch Kelly Monaco's nightly performances. She'd offer me a friendly wave from the rafters before taking her plunge down onto the stage each night. For so long, I dreamed of becoming a performer, and this was my chance to prove to everyone that I was capable of more than being a trophy girlfriend. It didn't faze me that the audience was never packed. Maybe it should have. The show was averaging roughly 300 people a night, which was pretty dismal considering the size of the theater and the expense of the production. But in early 2009, people weren't flocking to Vegas to see shows. If they happened to come to the city, they most likely spent their time in the casinos, hoping to earn back some of what they had lost in the recession. Either way, it was clear that something needed to change to help drive attendance. So right when I entered production, executives began an entire overhaul on Peep Show's marketing campaign. You couldn't turn a corner in Las Vegas without seeing me smiling on a billboard, poster, or taxi. Suddenly, the show had a face, and it was mine. But whether or not that face would sell tickets remained to be seen. As bad luck would have it, when my opening night came around, I hit some rough waters. Earlier that day, I had decided to text Chris. In retrospect, it was a dumb move. But I was just so happy and in a place where personally I wanted to forgive and forget. I'd heard from mutual acquaintances that Chris was not pleased when I got the Peep Show gig and announced my return to Las Vegas. After all, it had been his agenda to banish me from Vegas as if I had never existed. It must have chafed him even more that my appearance on Dancing with the Stars ended just as I had landed Peep Show. And whether I liked it or not, Chris was still a high-profile person in my new hometown, which could prove to be very small at times. Why not make an attempt to bury the hatchet? We'd certainly run into each other at some point. Hey, I just wanted to extend an invitation to my premiere party tonight, I typed into my phone. I wish you and your girlfriend the best. I assumed I wouldn't hear back from him, but wanted to extend the olive branch, so I at least knew I did what I could to end things on the best note possible. A few hours later, I was backstage in my dressing room, putting the finishing touches on my hair and makeup. I was taking a few deep breaths to calm my nerves when I heard my cell phone buzz. It was a text message from Chris. Instinctively, I looked at the clock. He must be going on late, I thought. It was a few minutes after his second show should have started. I expected a generic "good luck tonight" message. Instead, it went a little something like this. I told myself I wouldn't do this, but I'm answering your text anyway. Chris is with me now. Stop texting him. You are disgusting. You are in a burlesque show because you can't do anything else. You used an old man to get to the B list. Chris told me the real reason you guys broke up. It's not because of scheduling differences. It was because you were on antidepressants and he couldn't be with someone like that. If I had your reputation, I would be on antidepressants too. You are the biggest running joke around here. You got used. Lose this number. What's this girl hating on some antidepressants for? Must be nice to not have to use those. What's that like? I'd like to know. My face went white and I felt faint. I was completely beside myself. Apparently his new girlfriend had taken his phone during his performance. I sat still for what felt like 10 minutes, reading and rereading the text. So many petty comebacks flashed through my mind. I wanted to tell her that soon she would be the biggest running joke. Chris routinely dumped his girlfriends whenever he had a famous fling, and many of them would come crawling back the moment it fizzled. I wanted to tell her no one would even want to look at her face, let alone pay to see it. But mostly I wanted to tell her that Chris lied to her about our breakup. I already knew he could be a piece of shit, but I couldn't believe he was sharing my private life with her. During one of our late night talks, I had confided to Chris that I had taken antidepressants in the past. I was never ashamed of needing help, but the fact that he would use that information against me really pissed me off. It wasn't right. After taking a moment, I simply replied, Chris lied to you. I wasn't even on antidepressants when we were together. I didn't need to prove anything to her, and who knows if she would believe me anyway, but I wanted to say my piece. Not to mention, I wanted to take the opportunity to scroll through my BlackBerry and find one of the many flirty texts Chris sent to me 6 weeks earlier when I was on Dancing with the Stars, and after he had already moved her in. I selected a particularly salacious one, typed in my response to her rant, and hit send. Oh my gosh, what happened? Angel asked. She had come backstage to wish me luck and immediately registered the tears welling up in my eyes. I read the text out loud to her and explained what happened. Do not let this get to you, she said, grabbing my shoulders and looking me in the eye. Do not let this ruin your night. And don't think for a second she doesn't know what she's doing. She knows this is your big night. It's all over town. Thanks, I said, sniffing back the tears, so grateful that Angel had been there at the exact moment to say precisely what I needed to hear. You're right. I took a deep breath, stood up from my chair, pulled my shoulders back, and left my dressing room to face the press. Being the small town that the Vegas entertainment community is, I eventually heard about the aftermath of my response to that mean text. After reading it and Chris's earlier message, his girlfriend didn't let him escape unscathed. She apparently made an absolute scene in his dressing room during intermission and left him, only to come crawling back later. Of course. I changed my number after that. Unfortunately, the night would not be without another hiccup, as the show encountered some technical difficulties. The lift that was supposed to carry the male lead and me onto the stage for my big number wasn't working. As the stage went dark between scenes, the stagehands swept the props and us off into the wings. Quickly, I raced down the backstage stairs for my change, which included being dried off and having my hair redone in roughly 60 seconds, before making a far less dramatic entrance from the side of the stage. After the show, the cast laughed off the glitch and encouraged me, still rather distressed over it, to do the same. It was somehow freeing to know that I could survive even the most inopportune malfunctions and still manage to go on. Despite the mean text message and the broken lift, my official debut in Peep Show couldn't have been more perfect. The performance executives hosted a gala for me. While fancy parties weren't anything new, I felt like the toast of the town, drinking champagne and hanging out with industry bigwigs who were all there to toast my debut. Josh and Angel helped me laugh off the mean text from Chris's girlfriend, and despite the lift debacle, my reviews were glowing and advance ticket sales skyrocketed, making for some very happy producers. Planet Hollywood even blacked out the wood on the hotel's giant neon sign, so it read Planet Holly for the night. Was I dreaming? Or did this somehow really become my life? Right around the time of my arrival, Planet Hollywood announced an upcoming auction of some of Marilyn Monroe's personal belongings, which would be put on display throughout the casino. When I was asked to model them for an upcoming magazine feature, I couldn't believe my luck. Beyond honored, I modeled many of Marilyn's personal items, which I recognized from famous photos of the star. A white terry cloth bathrobe, an orange Pucci top, a curve-hugging fuchsia day dress, etc. I was fascinated with the quality of the pieces. Things were constructed with so much more care back in Marilyn's time. Even her casual wear was of the highest quality. A few items from Marilyn's movies were in the collection too. Flushed with excitement, I tried on the original custom-tailored piece intended for her Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend number, a costume that was deemed too risque and was eventually replaced in the film by the iconic pink gown. Much has been said about Marilyn's figure, and like many women, her weight fluctuated over the years, but this circa 1953 costume fit me like a glove. The flesh-tone leotard was covered with a light fishnet, creating the illusion of being completely nude under the netting. The piece was so well built, the boning carved out my waist without feeling heavy or tight, like a typical corset. A handful of rhinestones glittered across the bust, creating a sparkly nude look. It was hard to imagine that any other garment could make me feel sexier. There was one more piece that made a lasting impression on me. After donning a strapless cream-colored cocktail dress and a gorgeous amber necklace from Marilyn's personal collection, I was handed a kimono wrap to complete the look. There was no mistaking the frilly violet and pink Edwardian-style confection. It was a piece Marilyn wore in The Prince and the Showgirl, the same kimono wrap depicted in my beloved Marilyn Monroe paper doll set all those years earlier. Twirling around in front of the mirror like a little girl, I understood what Cinderella must have felt like when her fairy godmother waved her magic wand and produced the most perfect ball gown. I was in absolute awe. It was surreal to imagine that she had worn these very same pieces decades before me, and how as a little girl I shut my eyes and dreamed about what it would feel like to be her for just a moment. And now I knew, like me, Marilyn had suffered at the hands of some not very nice men. She was used, unappreciated, and struggled to find herself. She worked her way up in Hollywood with stars in her eyes and a kind heart, but found that Hollywood wasn't always as kind in return. She may have been publicly adored, idolized, and lusted after, but she often felt alone and trapped. Those dark demons eventually got the best of Marilyn. Part of me knows that that could have easily been my fate had I not chosen to take care of myself. I only wish poor Marilyn could have done the same. And I am going to wrap up this part, and we only have a couple more, we only have 2 more chapters to go, and then we are finished with this book. So I hope that I get to see you on the next one.